Hello there, and hi, and welcome. Um, this, as you well know, is Harry Potter Abridged. We are making our way through Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and we are on chapter number 3. Yes, three. Yes. That is right. Hang on. I'm like, suddenly I'm like, yes, okay, for sure. In chapter 3 of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is entitled The Night Bus. And the Night Bus is well, we'll get to its actual existence soon enough. It's pretty silly, but kind of great too. Right, so we'll just get right into it. At the end of our previous chapter, obviously Harry he'd had enough. He blew up his aunt, literally aunt, whatever. And in the movie, she starts flying up into the sky. I believe in the actual, I say believe, I just did this chapter the other day, but in the book she's just like floating around the ceiling and stuff, but same idea, they just made it a little more dramatic in the movie. Which, by the way, I can't remember if I've said this already since we started Prisoner of Azkaban so recently, but definitely one of the better movies, if not the best of the Harry Potter movies, especially when compared to the next one. Goblet of Fire is just a fucking disaster. Anyway, and the first two movies are like, they're cute and they have some magical elements to them, some good things, but the kids are so young and they're not good actors yet. And I mean, I liked them when they came out, I suppose. I haven't really rewatched most of them in a long time, actually, to be quite honest, except for when I go through now and watch segments of them to get my screenshots for these episodes. But anyway, and that's definitely not the same experience. I'm just getting little snippets and skipping around and stuff like that. But this movie had a bit more magic to it. Pun obviously intended, but I mean, it was just the way it was shot and the way it was put together, with the moving camera all the time, and just the visual style of it in general. The way the way it was adapted. There's a lot of reasons. But anyway, right, back to this chapter. So yes, as I said, Harry left the Dursleys, and this is the first time that he's left. Well, and actually, maybe the only time that he leaves on his own, and it kind of marks a difference. Obviously, in the first book, Hagrid retrieves him from the island that they're like hiding on. In the second book, Ron and his brothers Fred and George like rescue Harry, and rip the bars off his windows that have been attached there to keep him in. And this time, Harry like loses his temper, and not unreasonably, as we discussed in the previous episode. I mean, Aunt Marge, whatever, is I mean, she's a bitch, and she says a lot of really bitch. That's great, since she gets into the whole. She's the one who actually brings up that word in the story, with all that dog breeding analogy bullshit. But anyway, he loses his temper and he performs, I guess you could say, accidental magic, because I mean, he doesn't use a wand and he's not consciously being like, I'm gonna blow this bitch up. It like just happens out of his temper, which in a lot of ways, I mean, obviously a lot of wizards are able to do things when they're younger, without using a wand, or without doing it deliberately. But I do think that it also kind of shows us a little bit about Harry's power. I mean, he's been making things happen his whole life, and I know a lot of younger wizards do, but he's done some pretty remarkable things. Not the least of which was the whole thing that happened at the zoo with the with the snake and the glass and all of that. But anyway, so he leaves. He's like, screw this shit. He goes upstairs. He grabs his trunk. He packs it quickly, and he comes back downstairs and he threatens Uncle Vernon with his wand, and he leaves the house with no plan. And he's 13 years old. So it's, it's a departure in that way. Not just his departure from the house, but a departure from the previous two stories where he was sort of stuck with the Dursleys, and this time he's just like, screw you guys, I'm out. And so he walks several streets away before he sits down on a wall in Magnolia Crescent, which is actually it's interesting that she plants this in book 3 because Magnolia Crescent is where, if I'm not mistaken, is where the Dementors attack him and Dudley in book 5. So we're getting a layout of the neighborhood, sort of. So this is a few streets away from Privet Drive. And he's still angry. He's still, his temper is still like hasn't fully subsided yet, and his heart's still beating fast, and he's just still got the adrenaline from the outburst running through him. But it says after about 10 minutes alone, he starts to get a little panicky because, of course, he does. Like this was, in the moment, this was the best decision he had to make in theory. But now it's like, okay, what do I do now? Like I'm not because he's not anywhere near, any of his magical connections. He's not in London. I don't know where is, hang on. We're going to do this right now. I'm pretty sure that Little Whinging is not a place, because whinging is a word that kind of like fits too well into the story. Oh, but it's Surrey, right? Surrey is a real place, right? Let's find out where it is in relation to London. Okay, so it's like a sort of a suburb, if you will, to the south west of London. But again, he's not exactly. Something tells me that the town of Little Whinging is probably made up, but Surrey's obviously not. Nonetheless, it's not like he's in walking distance to Diagon Alley or anything like that. And obviously, he's a long way from Hogwarts. So, and this is the thing about, doing things in a heightened state of emotion or temper or whatever, is that, sometimes you don't exactly plan it all the way out. So, and this, at this point in the story, he is, as it says, and he's never been in a worse fix. It's worded. He's in a bit of a mess. Like he got out of a situation that sucked, but without any plan or ideas for a destination when he left. So that's, it's not good. He's stranded. He's in the Muggle world. He doesn't really know where to go or how to get there. And in his mind, he's just done more magic, and he got a warning when Dobby performed that hover charm in the previous book. So right now he's like afraid that he's going to be expelled, that his wand's going to be snapped. Like shit's not looking so hot for our Mr. Potter right now. And he's pretty sure that he's broken the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry. So. And he's surprised that he hasn't been, swooped down upon just yet. Which is interesting because I wonder if Rowling had come up with the idea of the trace yet. I mean, you got to wonder. There had to be something going on in her mind about it, because obviously, otherwise, he couldn't have been accused of performing the hover charm that Dobby actually performed in the previous book. So there's at least the beginnings of the idea of the trace. But nonetheless, he's out here in the world, and nobody's found him yet. Nobody's finding him. Nobody's what's the word I'm looking for? Not just approaching, but nobody's searching for him, or at least not as far as we know. And maybe that's just because he left so quickly, right after the incident had happened with Marge. And of course, he's wondering, like, is he going to be arrested? Is he going to be like expelled from the wizarding world altogether? And he's thinking about Ron and Hermione, and he's like, oh man, like, and he's like, they would love to help him if they could, if they knew what was going on, but they're not even in the country, first of all, and he has no way to contact them because wait, does he have Hedwig with him? No, he sent Hedwig off to Ron's place. That's right, before Marge arrived. So he has no way to contact anybody via Owl. And he doesn't know any other way to contact anybody at this point in his life, in his magical education and whatnot. And Ron's in Egypt and Hermione's in France, and so there's no nothing right now. And he doesn't have any Muggle money. He's got plenty of wizarding gold, but he has no Muggle money. So that's not. He doesn't even have a way to, like, say, catch a Muggle cab or something like that to take him to London. So, and obviously he's not going to be able to lug his trunk to London. By the way, like, maybe somebody will have an idea about this. Like, do you reckon his trunk is like the kind of thing that has like wheels on one of the corners, so he's able, when he's dragging it, like it's like he's actually wheeling it, like, because it seems like it's fairly sizable and like it's full of shit, but not full of shit, and so I'm like, I just wonder, like they always talk about him having, well, not just him, but everybody like lugging their trunks, and I'm like, I mean, obviously they're full of stuff and they're heavy, but do they have wheels on one of the corners, like kind of like how a suitcase does, like so that you can at least not just be dragging it by its corner on like whatever surface you're dragging it on. I don't know. This is something I've never had to actually deal with in real life, and I don't know if anybody else has, or if this is based on anything or not. Anyway. La 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 la. And of course he's like thinking, well, like I've already done magic, and what if I'm already expelled? And of course that idea is horrible, but he does think it. He's like, well, I could like bewitch he could put the invisibility cloak on and bewitch his trunk to make it light, which is interesting because like that's definitely something that's not been mentioned. And of course that's the whole thing too. Like sometimes I get caught up personally, and maybe you do too, in like trying to analyze like what he has and hasn't learned how to do, but it's like we don't experience every minute of every lesson, and we don't necessarily hear about every single spell that he's learned. So that is kind of one of those things. It's like definitely she mentions certain things in the context of a certain book to introduce them, because they're going to be used later, like spells or people or not technologies, but like other magical devices or beings or whatever it is. And so you wonder like what he's actually been exposed to, but apparently he knows how to make things not weigh a whole lot, via a charm of some sort. So he's thinking like maybe I should, pull out my broomstick and fly it to London. And of course he keeps imagining that he'll be able to go to Gringotts and like get his gold out, but it's like, if you're already in the predicament that you think you're in, where like the ministry's looking for you and you're in trouble, do you really think you're going to be able to just like slip through the Leaky Cauldron into Diagon Alley, into Gringotts, get your gold, and then leave and be an outlaw, like without being spotted or stopped by somebody who knows that you're being pursued? Maybe possible, but definitely not likely. And then he's like also thinking like, so if even if I did do all that, then I would just be like what, an outcast? Like, it's all looking pretty shall we say black for Harry here at this point. He's not really sure what to do. Let's see. So he opens his trunk and he's looking for the invisibility cloak, but because he's he's like trying to like, I mean, either way he's got to do something. He can't just sit here on this wall in Magnolia Crescent, and he's obviously not going back to the Dursleys at this point. But then, like, as he's looking in his trunk for the invisibility cloak, he senses something and he stands back up, straightens back up, whatever. And he's like, it's like his magical spidey sense is tingling. He's like, what the? So he bends back over his trunk again, and then he stands right back up again because he's like, what? Something's watching, something's going on. And he senses that something or someone or something is in the gap between the garage and the fence behind him. So he's like squinting now, like trying to see, and he's like, if it would just move, then I could know. And then he lights his wand with the with Lumos, and I guess like this is one thing that I when I was reviewing this chapter, I was like, is this something that is so innocuous and like not overtly magical that it doesn't cause any problem? I mean, because it's technically magic. I mean, you're creating light without using something burning or electricity. You're using your wand more specifically as like sort of a flashlight or a torch, as they call it in England. And I'm just wondering if he's doing that because he figures that he's already in trouble and so fuck it, or if it's because it's such a like not powerful spell. It just, it's just literally like, here's some light in the darkness. But anyway, nonetheless, he does it, and he holds it up high, and he sees, it says quite distinctly, the hulking outline of something very big with wide gleaming eyes. So he's obviously startled to see something, because obviously he had already sensed that there was something there, and so now he sees it, and it's big, and it's hulking, and it's scary, and he steps backwards, and he trips over his trunk, of course, and falls down. And it says the wand flew out of his hand as he flung out an arm to break his fall. I'm not really sure exactly. I guess he must have. Okay, so here's the thing: the night bus has some logic problems. I'm just gonna say that outright, at least when it comes to Harry, anyway, in this particular situation, because when you use the night bus, what you do apparently is that I guess you have to be at a roadside, because it says you stick out your wand hand or your wand. It doesn't say this yet, but it's going to in a minute. And then the night bus like comes and picks you up. It's like a signal. But like, first of all, I mean, I guess, again, it doesn't say this specifically, but you must have to be at a roadside, because obviously if you stick your wand out, most of the time you're sticking it out to use it for something, not just to hail a bus magically. So obviously, otherwise, anytime somebody stuck their, like, went to use their wand for anything, they'd be calling the night bus. So we'll assume that that's the one thing. You have to be like on a curb or something, like facing a roadway, which is whatever. It's magic, so you can kind of like imply like weird rules and let them work. but the other thing, and this is the part that bugs me the most, really, because I mean, how you hail it is whatever. Even though this was definitely like sort of a strange one because he's like falling and he's not doesn't appear to be even facing the road, so it's like what like he held out his wand in the opposite direction. Maybe I don't have the orientation like right in my brain or whatever. Maybe the place that he was looking was across the road. I I don't know. Anyway, but the other thing is that like even though the night bus does like make like giant leaps, it basically is like a big apparating vehicle. Even then, it still takes time to get places. Yet, whenever it's hailed in the story, it seems to appear like almost fucking immediately. And so, like again, Harry does the so he it says his wand flew out of his hand as he flung out an arm to break his fall, and he landed hard in the gutter. There was a deafening bang, is the very next sentence in the next paragraph, and Harry threw up his hands to shield his eyes against the sudden blinding light. So, like within not even seconds, but like within a second, it seems, from him like accidentally pointing his wand out into the street, the bus is there. And that doesn't make sense. Not really. And again, I understand it's a children's story. I understand that the story involves magic and there's a suspension of disbelief to a certain point. But Rowling herself has said that there's like an underpinning of logic in this story, and there is in a lot of ways. Like that's why she was saying in that interview that I referenced a few episodes ago about, well, the interview, the video that I watched with her and Daniel Radcliffe of talking about the movies. And she would say that, you know, there were certain times where, like, they would have a spell in the movie, and she'd be like, why would somebody do that? They wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense in this situation. So, and she was the one in that section there that mentioned the logic that underpins the story. And there is a lot of logic, but of course, as is inherent in the nature of writing a series, and I think I've mentioned this in maybe even the last video, but you know, obviously there are going to be some inconsistencies. Anyway, but I mean, I get why this has to happen in a way, because obviously if he was just standing around after he'd flung his wand out or whatever, and then the bus showed up like minutes later, it would be a little bit harder to explain. However, if anything, it would have been nice if they had been like able to show how that for whatever reason the night bus just happened to be nearby. Like that would have been like, I don't know, if there could have been a way to sort of like explain that part, like they were already nearby and when he hailed them they just jumped over to where he was. I don't know, like, because that's the other thing. Like once Harry gets on the bus here in a second, there never seems to be any moments where they like disapparate and reapparate where somebody's getting on. It's like everybody's getting off the bus after that point. Which again, I understand story wise why she sort of did that, but it's not like the bus needed to be empty for him to get where he's going anyway. That's not really the point. The point is that it should be showing it like disappearing and reappearing where somebody's hailed it, so that we sort of get like some continuity into whatever. Yep, I've thought about the night bus a lot. Nonetheless, he has no idea about any of this shit at this point. He's like, what the? And anyway, right after he hears the bang and has the blinding light, he then is able to jump back onto the pavement, which, by the way, until fairly recently, and maybe I mentioned this before, I don't know, I didn't realize that pavement was a word for sidewalk. In America, the road is paved, and that is the pavement. We call the sidewalk, and it's made out of what we would call concrete, not pavement. But when people in England refer to the pavement, they mean the sidewalk. So anyway, Harry rolls back onto the pavement or the sidewalk just in time to get out of the way because here comes the bus, which is described as a triple decker violently purple bus, which appears out of thin air. So, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like, I think the idea of the night bus is pretty fucking great and hilarious. Like this bus that can apparate and disapparate with a bunch of people in it. I mean, there's like, even though it's like clunky and strange and quirky and weird, it's actually a pretty brilliant bit of magic to be able to have something that can do this, because it's like for people who aren't good at apparition or never passed their tests, people who don't have brooms or are just stranded somewhere or whatever, this is an option. It's a strange option, and it's not the most comfortable ride in the world because of the way it's set up, but it is an option. So. And it says in gold lettering over the windscreen, which is the windshield in America, it says the night bus, KNIGHT, night bus. That is to say, it is not a bus that travels only at night. It is a bus that is named after knights, medieval knights, for whatever reason. Like, I would love to hear the story of the person who invented the night bus. I want to know more about that guy or girl or woman, whatever. Anyway, and Harry's like, what? Wait a minute. What in the world? Like, he just fell. So he's like almost thinking that he's like hallucinating, because he can't believe that, like, out of nowhere, this thing has just popped into being. And then a conductor in a purple uniform comes out and immediately starts announcing what it is, which, by the way, is kind of a strange thing too. Like this, which must be part of the job description, or either that or Stan Shunpike, who we're about to meet, is just particularly keen on his job, whatever it is. Because, I mean, if you're picking somebody up in the middle of a Muggle neighborhood, perhaps you don't want to announce what you're doing. I'm just a thought. Anyway, so he comes out with his whole welcome to the night bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. Just stick out your one hand, step on board, and we can take you anywhere you want to go. And so we find out that his name is Stan Shunpike, and he will be the conductor. And then he stops and he looks down and realizes that Harry's on the ground, and he's like, and Harry grabs his wand and picks it up, and he's like, wait a minute, what the? And Stan's like, he realizes that Stan is only like a few years older than he is, so he's like a late teenager. And he's described as having large protruding ears and a fair few pimples. And I have to admit, Stan's like kind of a great, like, funny character. And they give him, there's a specific accent, because I don't know them though, so I can't name it. But it's one of those things where she writes his dialogue in a way that, like, forces you to sort of like hear the accent in your mind when you're reading it, because it's like Hagrid. She writes Hagrid's dialogue in a different way, but in a way that sort of forces the accent on your mind a little bit, which I think is kind of a good thing. Otherwise, everybody would seem like they speak the same, and they obviously don't all speak the same. But he's like, "What you fall over for?" Spelled CHOO, Choo, fall over for. And Harry's like, "I didn't do it on purpose." And he's just like, his jeans are torn and his hand's bleeding. I mean, he's just like, he really, he was scared. And so this, before we move on with Stan, so the other thing is obviously, we know that, what he saw was not an apparition. It was in fact a big black dog. And I wonder, was Sirius going to reveal himself before the night bus showed up, or was he really just trying to catch a glimpse? I remember him saying later in the book that he was trying to see him or whatever, but Do you think if nobody showed up, he was going to do something? Or do you think that at that point, Sirius knew that it would be dangerous? Well, not even dangerous, but like just not advisable to reveal himself. But yet he couldn't help wanting to. And that's the other thing, too. How did he manage to, like... Maybe he followed him, I guess. Because, I mean, obviously, he's supposed to be at Privet Drive. And now he's, like, a few streets away in Magnolia Crescent. So, anyway. And so in that little back and forth with Stan, he's like, oh yeah, and he's like remembers why he'd fallen over in the first fucking place, and turns around to look where he'd seen the creature. But of course, with the night bus just arriving with the big bang and a bunch of light shining into the area where he was trying to look before, nothing's there. And Harry tries to explain to Stan what he'd seen, but of course, again, it's not there. And so Harry sees Stan looking at his scar, and he's like, what's that on your head? And Harry's like, oh shit, like I can't be Harry Potter right now, like people are probably looking for me. So he like tries to like cover it up with his hair, and he's like, and Stan's like, what's your name? And he's like, Neville Longbottom. And Harry's, so that's the first name that came to him. And so he's Neville for the moment. Which is also a bit ironic, being that we learn way later that Neville is the only other person in this story that might have been in the same position as Harry, for reasons that we'll get to much later. But yeah. Anyway, so it is kind of a nice little bit of not even really, is that foreshadowing? I guess it kind of is, but the fact that of all the people that Harry goes to school with, he doesn't say my name is Ron Weasley or Dean Thomas. He says Neville Longbottom. Anyway, and so he's like, okay, so this bus, it'll take me anywhere, and he's like. Stan's like, well, yeah, anywhere on land. And he's like, you did flag us down, right? And okay, so again, this is another thing. I mean, granted, I know this isn't the standard situation that happens with the night bus, but they're having like this big long conversation, and I'm like, what if somebody somewhere else is sticking their wand out right now? Should they be expecting the night bus immediately, or is it? Again, is it just only in this particular instance that they happen to be able to get to Harry right away for whatever reason? But Stan, like, as a means to sort of like tell the reader how this works, he's like, you did flag us down, stuck out your wand hand, didn't you? And Harry's like, yeah. So how much to get to London? And so that's decided, and you can also get more. You can pay more to get hot chocolate and a bottle of water and a toothbrush in the color of your choice. So Harry gets his wizarding money out, because he actually has that, and pays the 11 sickles, and he and Stan lift his trunk and Hedwig's empty cage, and they get into the bus. And so, and we find out that the bus doesn't have regular seats. It's got like brass bedsteads. And there's candles burning, because again, the wizarding world doesn't have electricity. And so Stan stations Harry right behind the driver, like one of the front beds in the front of the bus. And we find out that the driver is sitting in an armchair. So like all of the accommodations on the inside of this bus are not like Muggle buses at all. And we're introduced to our driver, Ernie Prang, who is pretty hilarious in the movie, and kind of an interesting character in the book too. He's an elderly wizard. He's got thick glasses, so we're kind of led to believe that his eyesight's not very great, which makes sense when we find out about like how they travel in a minute. And so they there's another loud bang, and and every time they there's a bang, it's like they don't just seem to disapparate and reapparate somewhere else. Like there's also like sort of a forward momentum to the apparition, so everything gets knocked backwards, and so it's like a very jarring experience to ride the night bus, because it's just like over and over and over again, bang. So anyway, yeah, Harry like falls flat on his bed when the first one happens, and so he like pulls himself back up, and now they're like running down in a completely different street, and Stan proceeds to tell him that they're now where they were before he flagged them down, which we don't really know where that is, but no, it says, yeah, we do. He's like, where are we? Are we somewhere near Wales? And I get it that, like, in theory, if you're disapparating and reapparating somewhere else, that could be anywhere. So, in fact, distance isn't really a factor. But they do drive the bus some, too. And that's sort of the thing about it. It's not like it just pops into being, disappears, reappears somewhere else, and then like does the same. It does drive a little bit too in between all of that, which is sort of like it's a little bit of a hybrid of transportation styles. So they're getting ready to drop off a lady named Madame Marsh. Stan goes to get her, and and this goes back to the whole thing about Ern wearing like thick glasses, or maybe not being the best with his vision or whatever, because it says here that Ernie didn't seem to have mastered the use of the steering wheel, because the night bus keeps mounting the pavement, which again means like coming up on the sidewalk, but for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, but because of magic, it doesn't hit anything. Like everything seems to sort of jump out of its way and then move back into position once it's passed, which is kind of akin to how like buildings that like only wizards can see seem to sort of pop into existence. Although that's not always the case. Like it's only really with number 12 Grimmauld Place in book 5 that it happens that way, where it seems to pop into existence and like everything moves around it. Whereas Diagon Alley, or the Leaky Cauldron, more to be more specific, doesn't do that. It's just there, but for whatever reason, the Muggles don't see it. And the entrance to the to St. Mungo's is like everybody can seem to see it, but only wizards are able to enter it. And the telephone box that you use to get into the visitor's entrance of the ministry is also visible to everybody, but only if you are a wizard and you dial the right number in this old dilapidated phone box are you able to get down there. So there's different situations, but anyway, and so they let Madame Marsh off, and she's like shown having like a handkerchief to her mouth because she's about to throw up from riding on this insane bus. And then there's another bang, and now they're running down a narrow country lane with trees jumping out of the way. And it's mentioned that Harry doesn't think he would have been able to sleep on a regular bus, much less on a bus that keeps banging and jumping all over the place. Which is kind of funny because it's like they've got buses. I mean, they've got beds on this bus, but like, who the hell would be able to sleep in this scenario? And again, also like, since it does travel great distances in a short time, like, who on earth would be on there long enough to need a bed? I don't know. I guess that was just like something that she thought would be kind of funny to have there. But anyway. And so after the insanity and the novelty have worn off a little bit, he starts to worry again, like, what's going to happen? And, like, I wonder what, I wonder if the Dursleys have got Aunt Marge off the ceiling yet. And Harry catches Stan reading a copy of the Daily Prophet. And he sees on the front page that's facing out a picture of the escaped convict that he'd seen on the Muggle News. And Harry's like, wait, that guy, he was on the Muggle News. Who is that? And Stan's like, Sirius Black. Of course he was. Where you been, Neville? And so he kind of laughs at Harry because Harry's like, because Harry, at this point, Harry hasn't been receiving the Daily Prophet as in Privet Drive, so he doesn't really know like what's going on in the wizarding world at large. Stan's like, you ought to read the papers more. So anyway, he gives the paper to Harry, and Harry reads it, and so then we find out a little bit more about who, well, not a little bit more. We find out for the first time anything about Sirius Black. It's the first time that the name is actually like mentioned at this point. And so we get the text of the article, Black Still at Large, and we find out that he's the most infamous prisoner to ever be held in Azkaban, and he's eluding capture from the Ministry. And Cornelius Fudge has said that they're doing all they can to recapture him, and we beg the magical community to remain calm. Blah, blah, blah. Fudge has been criticized. Criticized for telling the Muggle Prime Minister, but he's like, I had to. And I mean that's actually a good point. He's like, he's a danger to anyone who crosses him, magic or Muggle. And so this is another thing. Fudge is, I mean, he ultimately isn't a great person, but he's not a horrible person either. He's not even evil. He's just he's corrupted and I wouldn't even say power hungry as so much as that he likes the position that he's in, and that causes problems later. But you get a sense here, I mean, because he's like, we don't want Muggles or wizards, harmed by Black, basically. So anyway, and we find out later that there is like a long-running relationship between Fudge and the Muggle Prime Minister that actually comes up in the 6th book, which I just started today in my re-listening of the series in the chapter called The Other Minister. Anyway, we'll not get off on that subject right now. Blah, 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 blah. Oh. And there's like a little dig at guns in general, because it says that Muggles have been told that Black is carrying a gun, which they describe in the paper as, in the Daily Prophet, as a kind of metal wand which Muggles use to kill each other. Which is A, oversimplification, but B, also kind of accurate. But anyway, kind of. Obviously, they're used for other things too. But anyway, blah, 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 blah. And we get mentioned that Black supposedly, well, it doesn't say supposedly, but it says that Black murdered 13 people with a single curse 12 years ago. And so people are in fear of something like that happening again, which is understandable. If you think that somebody did do something like that, you would be, and they were back on the loose, you would be a bit terrified that they might do such a thing again. Especially because, and this isn't said yet, I don't believe, but it's well, I mean, I think it's about to be said. Let's wait. Hang on. And so Harry looks at the picture and he sees the shadowed eyes, which are also described later as being sunken looking or whatever. And it says that he looks a bit like a vampire. With his white waxy skin and such. And Stan's like, yeah, he's scary looking, right? And he's like, he murdered 13 people. And Stan's like, yep. With witnesses and all. Broad daylight. Yes, and that's what I thought. And so the rumor or the thought is that Black was a big supporter of Voldemort, which Stan refers to, of course, as ooh, ooh, double O, and Harry's like, Voldemort, and of course you just can't say the name in front of like the average wizard without them kind of freaking out, and Stan's like, does kind of freak out. He's like, you out of your tree, which apparently means out of your mind. That's definitely not a phrase we say in America, but it's fairly straightforward as to what it must mean. And he's like, what'd you say his name for? And so Harry's like, oh shit, right, I forgot that you can't do this. And he's like, I forgot. And he's like, forgot? So anyway, so Harry's like, right, but disregarding the fact that I said his name. So Black was a supporter of him, right? And Stan's like, yeah. And of course, then he makes reference to Harry Potter, which of course he doesn't realize that he's talking to Harry Potter, but and he's talking. Basically, he's just sort of retelling the stories, like when Harry Potter he put paid to who, basically meaning killing him or sending him off. And then he talks about how Voldemort supporters were rounded up, and he says most of them came quiet because it was over. But he says not Sirius Black. And apparently, like, the rumors are that Sirius Black was going to be second in command once who took over. So then the story is that Black is cornered in the middle of a street full of muggles, and Black took out his wand and blasted half the street apart, and a wizard and 12 muggles all died. Which is, on the surface, if that's the real true story, then that's somebody that's really fucked up and dangerous, and that you should definitely be on the lookout for. And we find out that apparently what happened after he did that was that he laughed after killing all those people because he's mad, apparently. And he says, he's mad, isn't he, Ern? And Ern says, well, if he wasn't mad when he went into Azkaban, he will be now. And beyond that, Ern says he'd blow himself up before he set foot in that place. And so they talk about how they had to cover it up, and that it was passed off as a gas explosion, which, if you're going to have to explain something blowing up in the middle of the street, that's a pretty good explanation as it goes for muggles. And we also find out that there's never been a breakout from Azkaban before. And we get mention again of the Azkaban guards mentioned in that phrasing. And why the fuck they don't just say Dementors and get it over the way, I don't know. I guess for whatever reason, Rowling really wanted to save that term for our first personal encounter with a Dementor, which is coming up in another chapter or two. But it is a little frustrating because once it is mentioned, most people refer to them as Dementors and not as the Azkaban guards. But up to this point, they are mentioned as the Azkaban guards. I'm pretty positive that I got into this in a previous episode in the last book, because it happens when Hagrid has to, I think that's where it is, when Hagrid has to go to Azkaban briefly because they think he's reopened the Chamber of Secrets for, well, basically, not so much that they actually believe that, but because they don't know what else to do. And by they, I mean the Ministry. And so, yeah, even at this point, Ern's like, talk about something else, Stan. Those Azkaban guards give me the collywobbles. So again, Azkaban guards. It's an unfortunate thing that sort of happens when you're creating a world as you're telling a story through a series of books. Like, you don't necessarily come up with all the stuff ahead of time. But this one's a little weird, though, because, again, they are mentioned or referenced in the second book. Maybe she hadn't named them yet. Maybe she had, and she just wanted to save the name for the moment. It's just, it's annoying, though. It's kind of like, I feel this way about Regis Skeeter, too. I feel like the Daily Prophet is mentioned all the time from book 1 on. And yet, it's not till book 4 that we find out that there's this one particular reporter who writes a lot of horrible stuff. In fact, the Daily Prophet's not even necessarily... Well, that's not true. No. I was thinking of the wrong thing. The Daily Prophet's not even really shown as being a antagonistic force of any kind. I mean, we do, like, find out that, like, sometimes things are covered up because, like, for example, the attacks at the school don't show up in there right away. And then there's other times I think that they mentioned that maybe the ministry's, like, hushing something up in the Daily Prophet. That might be after Rita, though. But point being is that it's like things aren't mentioned until they're relevant to Harry in the story. And now, in certain cases, there's, like, the idea that until Harry hears about something specifically, maybe he technically hears it elsewhere, but it's not mentioned in a chapter. And it's kind of like that. There's probably a name for this phenomenon, but like, it's that phenomenon where, like, once you hear a word and understand what it means, that suddenly you notice other people saying it too, and you're like, oh, well, has this word always been being said and I just didn't notice it? And the answer usually is yes. Or, like, for example, like when I got a certain car in my life, at one point, it was like all of a sudden I noticed that there were, like, a shit ton of them on the road, and I'd never really paid attention to it before that moment. But because I owned one now, I was like, oh shit, there's silver Honda Civics everywhere. You know, like, I don't know. So there's an argument for that, to a certain degree, but the problem is that we have it right here where somebody's talking to Harry and they're saying the Azkaban guards and they're not saying Dementors. So that's, to me, that's a bit, not say problematic. I mean, obviously it doesn't really affect the story. It's just kind of silly because it's like, that's not what people would be saying. They wouldn't be calling them the Azkaban guards. Whatever. So, and so Harry's, like, feeling even worse. He's just like, oh man, this is crazy. And he's, like, thinking about, like, Stan. He's imagining a conversation with, like, a future passenger on the bus where Stan's like, hear about that Harry Potter blew up his aunt? We had him on the bus, didn't we, Ern? My accent today is just shit, and my Stan's even worse, but sorry, guys. Anyway, he's just imagining Stan like telling the story, because obviously Stan likes to talk and tell stories. So, and Harry's just like, oh man, am I gonna go to Azkaban like Sirius Black? Like he's you know, and it's funny because in not the next book, but the book after, it's suddenly like the kind of things that he's worried about right now are the kind of things that actually end up happening to him. But right now, like, he has no real reason to worry, but he doesn't know that yet. So there's some inconsistency, and that's not story inconsistency. That's the ministry being inconsistent and Fudge being inconsistent and things like that. And we get some of that inconsistency sort of pointed out to us, I think, in this chapter, actually. So let's keep going here. We get mention of Hagrid having to go to Azkaban the previous year for a couple of months. I'd forgotten that it was that long. That's gotta suck. And he remembers the terror on Hagrid's face when he was told that he was going to have to go to Azkaban. And so again, like I was saying before, for whatever reason, they don't seem to pick anybody else up. They're just dropping people off at this point. All the way to the point where Harry's the last passenger left. And again, why? I guess just for the story. I don't know. It doesn't really matter either way, though. Like, people could be on the bus. Who gives a shit? But anyway, that's how it goes. And so he's like, right, whereabouts in London? And he's like, Diagon Alley. And so they're like, all right, here we go. And bang. And so next thing you know, they're coming down Charing Cross Road. And buildings and benches are squeezing themselves out of the way of the bus. And Harry notices that the sky is getting a little lighter, which this is another one of those moments, and I'm sure somebody else will point out to me why I'm wrong, but in my mind, not enough time has passed since what should have been like mid to late evening when he was blowing his aunt up to now for the sun, for the sky to be lightening pre-dawn wise. Like, that's like, if let's just say let's say like them having their after dinner coffee and brandy was, let's be liberal and say it was like 11 p.m., which I doubt it was even that late. But even if it was 11 p.m., for the sky to be lightening, it's got to be like, 5 a.m. or something. Like, there's no way that 6 fucking hours have passed. At most, an hour has passed. Maybe 2. Not at most, but I'd say at most 2. So there's, in my mind, I mean, but I think what the argument that people will make is that this trip on the night bus is longer than we think it is, I guess. Anyway, so Harry's like, oh, I'm going to have to lie low for a couple of hours and then go to Gringotts when it opens, and then who knows what's going to happen. But my point is that it should really just be getting like, it should be like 1 o'clock in the morning right now, maybe 2 at the latest. Whatever. So they pull up in front of the Leaky Cauldron, and so Harry thanks the Ern, and Stan helps him lower his trunk. And he's like, all right, well, see you later. But Stan, as it turns out, is not paying attention to Harry because he's staring into the doorway of the Leaky Cauldron. And next thing you know, Harry hears a voice. There you are, Harry. And before he could even turn around, he feels a hand on his shoulder, and he's like, oh. And at that point, of course, Stan realizes that because the person said Harry, that this is not Neville Longbottom, random anonymous person. And Harry turns around and is like, oh, fuck. Because it's Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic himself. And Stan's like, what'd you call Neville, Minister? And he's like, Neville? Nope, this is Harry Potter. And Stan's all like, I knew it. Guess who Neville is, Ern? He's Harry Potter. I can see his scar. And Fudge is like, yeah, that's great, Stan. Maybe shut the fuck up. How about that? It's like, we gotta go inside now. So Fudge directs Harry inside the pub, and Tom, the wizened, toothless landlord, shows up. So, which gives you that feeling, of course, that the Leaky Cauldron is ancient, because obviously Tom is. And Tom's like, "You've got him, Minister," and so blah blah blah, and so they get a private parlor, and Stan's giving him shit like, how come you didn't tell us who you are, Neville? He keeps calling him Neville, even though he knows he's not Neville. Stan's kind of funny. And so they're like, all right. So Fudge takes Harry off to this private parlor to get away from, well, there's probably nobody in the pub otherwise, but being that the pub is the entrance to Diagon Alley, you kind of get the sense that maybe it never truly closes, which is interesting because, like, when does Tom sleep, or does he have an assistant? What's going on there? So anyway, Fudge steers him into the parlor, and he asks him to sit down, and Harry's like, oh man, here we fucking go. Of course, Fudge doesn't know that Harry knows who he is, because when Harry did see him the one time, when they took Hagrid to Azkaban, actually, Harry was under an invisibility cloak, so Fudge doesn't know that Harry's been like a few feet away from him before and seen him up close. But so he introduces himself and tells him that he's the Minister for Magic. Tom reappears and gives them some tea and crumpets and such. Not even exactly sure what crumpets are, but somebody will tell me. Probably Jorge. And so Fudge is all like, you've had us in a right flap. And he was like basically saying that he was starting to worry, but he's like, but you're safe, and that's what matters. And so again, Fudge right now seems to be like on the side of like logic, reason, and concern for Harry. And so, but he's being like totally, friendly towards Harry, and Harry's like, this is a bit strange. Like, he's expecting Fudge to sort of be coming down on him right now and telling him off and stuff, and that's not what's happening. Instead, he explains how that Marge, Aunt Marge, has been deflated and her memory's been modified, and so she doesn't remember anything. But and this is interesting. They from the way that the story is told, it's not specifically mentioned, but well, it kind of is in a way, because he says that Fudge says that your aunt and uncle are very angry, and I'm like, why didn't they just fucking modify their memories too, and like make them think that Harry left for some other reason or something, instead of having them remember this specific incident. Maybe that goes against something, I don't really know, because obviously since Vernon and Petunia and Dudley all know about Harry and know about the Wizarding World, even if they don't know a lot about it. They know of they're aware of its existence at the very least. Whereas Marge had no idea whatsoever. But nonetheless, like, if they modified her memory, like, what are they going to make her think that Harry was never there during her visit? Like, I'm like, again, why not just modify all of their memories so that nobody remembers the incident happening, and doesn't have to work against Harry ever. But whatever. But anyway, he said, Fudge says that they are prepared to take him back the following summer, which we find out. Well, we don't find out till book 6. Well, no, we find out at the end of book 5 why Harry has to return there every summer, because that's always kind of a contentious point. Like, why the fuck does he have to go back there now that he's got other people that he could stay with, people that care about him and actually like him? But we'll find that out later. So, and And Harry's like, I don't ever want to go back to Privet Drive. And Fudge is like, I'm sure you'll feel differently once you've calmed down, because nobody seems to really understand how shitty the situation there is, or either that, or maybe, well, no, I guess Fudge kind of does, because he's like, I'm sure you're fond of each other very deep down. So Harry's like, yeah, I'm not gonna get into this then, never mind. And so Fudge is like, so all that remains, and Harry's like, oh shit, here we go. And he's like, is to decide where you're going to spend the last 3 weeks of your holidays. And he's like, I suggest you stay here at the Leaky Cauldron. And Harry's like, wait, whoa, time the fuck out. Like, what about my punishment? Which is kind of a dumb thing to say when you're, like, hoping not to be in trouble. But it's like he's so flabbergasted that of all fucking people, the Minister for Magic, the head of the government in his country for the wizarding world, is sitting right across from him, and he's not being punished for something that he feels like he broke the law for. He says that he broke the law and mentions the decree. And this is interesting because he's showing Fudge right now that he understands that his actions can have consequences. And Fudge is like, oh, we're not going to punish you for that. Blowing up your aunt, you're not going to Azkaban for that. It's not a big deal. So this conversation is interesting because later there are other circumstances that are more serious, but all the same were reasonable, because that's the it's actually Harry calls it the decree for the restriction of underage wizardry, but later, and maybe earlier too, I don't know, but there's the word reasonable restriction of underage magic comes into play. And I don't know if she renames it or if it's just like official terms versus unofficial terms or what, but reasonable is definitely mentioned later, because the whole idea is that in general, under a certain age, you're not supposed to perform magic away from school, and you're definitely not supposed to perform magic in front of muggles, because obviously the whole point is the statute of secrecy there. But it's also because if you're underage, you're not fully qualified, you might do some fucked up shit or whatever. So anyway, Fudge is like basically saying it was an accident, and we understand that. Whereas later he's like, it wasn't an accident, and we don't understand that. But again, the reasonable thing is the part that, anyway, whatever. But even now, Harry's like, but that still doesn't make sense, because he says, he's like, last year I got an official warning because a house elf smashed pudding in my uncle's house. So, and this is something that comes up later too, where Fudge is like, a house elf, huh? Sure it was. Whereas right now he's telling him, and Fudge does not question it. He doesn't say like, really, was there a house elf? We just figured it was you, and it wasn't that big of a deal. But and Harry's like, I got an official warning, and the Ministry of Magic said I would be expelled if there was any more magic there. And Harry sees that Fudge looks awkward, because Fudge is realizing that well, not just realizing that there's inconsistency, but the fact that Harry's like pointing it out like very explicitly. And he says, circumstances change, Harry. We have to take into account in the present climate. And he's like, surely you don't want to be expelled. And he's like, of course I don't, but I'm just trying to understand how these fucking laws work. And Fudge is like, what's the fuss about then? Have a crumpet. He's like, let me go see if there's a room for you. And so Harry's just like left kind of in a bit of a bewildered state. Like he's just like, I mean, he's obviously, happy to not be in trouble, but he just can't really put it all together. And then he's like, this is when he finally like comes to the point of like, surely like the Minister for Magic himself doesn't normally get involved in matters of underage magic. Because, I mean, typically he surely wouldn't. I mean, that's for like other people to sort out, the people who have, like, not necessarily less important jobs, but just people who have different jobs. He's the head. It shouldn't be something that he has to even get involved in, but it's because of the seriousness of the situation that Fudge has involved himself, and because it's Harry, who, regardless of what Fudge might say later, is looked at as a bit of a special case in the wizarding world all the way around, because he was the one who survived the killing curse from Voldemort and essentially made Voldemort go away. Can't necessarily say die, because nobody seems to believe that he's completely gone, but they don't think that he's coming back either. So, blah, 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 blah. And so, sure enough, there's a room in the Leaky Cauldron for Harry to stay in. And Fudge is like, well, one thing, just don't go off into Muggle London, stay in Diagon Alley, come in before dark. And he's like, I'll have Tom keep an eye on you for me. And so Harry's like, starts to say why, and we don't really know what the question is, but Fudge cuts him off. He's like, don't want to lose you again, do we? It's like, best we know where you are. And so he doesn't, basically you can tell that Fudge is like avoiding mentioning Sirius. Like, he doesn't want to be like, well, we're worried that Sirius Black is after you and we don't want you to be captured and killed. So he avoids mentioning Black at all. So he's like, all right, well, I'll be off. Plenty to do, being the head of a fucking government, now that I've dealt with you. But Harry's like, so, any luck with Sirius Black? And Fudge is like, oh, son of a... God damn it, I was almost out the door. And he's like, oh, you've heard, have you? Well, no, but it's only a matter of time. The Azkaban guards have never failed yet. And again, no mention of the word Dementors. Although here, it makes a little bit more sense because Fudge is already trying to stay off the whole topic in general, so maybe he wouldn't want to use the word and then have to explain what they are if Harry doesn't know, because he knows Harry was brought up by Muggles. So Fudge not calling the Dementors actually is like the one time that it almost kind of sort of makes sense, that he wouldn't use the word and just call them the Azkaban guards. So whatever. So he gets ready to leave, and shakes his hand and all that good stuff. And Harry's like, can I, one more question? And Fudge is like, sure, fine. And he's like, well, so there's this thing about the Hogsmeade permission form, because, third years can go to Hogsmeade. And he's like, I didn't get that form signed. Could you do it? And so then we have a right little contradiction of things about rules, because he's like, oh, no, I'm not your parent or guardian. He's like, but you're the Minister for Magic. If you gave me permission. He's like, no, I'm sorry, Harry, but rules are rules, which, of course, is just an excuse because he doesn't want Harry in Hogsmeade because it could be dangerous. And obviously he's just totally ignored rules to allow Harry to stay here and not get in trouble for his underage accidental magic. So he's like, right, I'm out of here. And so Fudge manages to get away. And so Tom shows him Harry to his room. And sure enough, he gets into his room, and there is fucking Hedwig, just because Hedwig is like the best magical pet there ever was, apparently. Okay, maybe not. Next to Fawkes, because Fawkes is probably the best magical pet in the entire series. But Hedwig's a close second, because she finds his friends and gets presents for him for his birthday, shows up wherever he is, like, and Tom even says, very smart owl you've got there. Arrived about 5 minutes after you did. I'm like, where the fuck is the burrow that somehow Hedwig was able to get there 5 minutes after Harry showed up? Like, the fuck? But whatever. I mean, Hedwig is pretty awesome, so okay. And so, blah, 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 blah. And so, yeah, Harry's just like, whew, okay, well, there's all that insanity. And now he's facing like 3 weeks in like the coolest place in the wizarding world, short of Hogsmeade, by himself. And yeah, so, and it says here he'd only left Privet Drive a few hours ago. So what the fuck time is it? Is the sky really lightning? Like, what's... Because it says... All right, hang on a second. Blah, 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 blah. It says the sky outside the window was changing rapidly from deep velvety blue to cold steel gray and then slowly to pink shot with gold. So obviously the sun's coming up. But then it also says Harry could hardly believe that he'd only left Privet Drive a few hours ago. Well, has it been a few hours or has it been 6? Or is a few more flexible than I like to give it credit for? Maybe it is. And he's like, man, I'm not expelled, and now I've got 3 weeks. And that's pretty amazing at his age, you know, like to have 3 weeks in a place where people are going to treat you nicely, and you're going to have access to all the cool wizarding shops, like. And he's not poor, quite the opposite. So, anyway, and he's like, yeah, Hedwig, it's been a really weird night, and without taking a single thing off, including his glasses, he just lays back on the bed and falls asleep. And so that is how the chapter ends. So yeah, you know, it's another not super long chapter, but it's like it's our transition chapter. Like I said in the first book, it's Hagrid who introduces him to the wizarding world. In the second book, it's being rescued, if you will, by the Weasleys with the flying car. And in this case, he flees on his own, but then he's essentially rescued accidentally by the night bus, and then gets to end up in like one of the coolest places in the wizarding world for 3 weeks before school starts. So, what else? Is there anything? I think that's pretty much it's not a terribly involved chapter. So what do we learn in this chapter? We learn about the night bus, first of all, and how you summon it and how it works, kind of, sort of. Most importantly, we get our first mention of Sirius Black right after Harry sees a big black dog, which will also be a recurring theme in this book for a while. So now Harry knows that Sirius Black is he knows that Sirius Black is the criminal that the convict, as it were, that he saw on TV in the kitchen in Privet Drive. We find out that the Ministry is hella inconsistent when it comes to how they deal with underage magic and just things in general. And we see that through Fudge, which of course is the figurehead of the government. So that speaks volumes, because it's not like it's just some random official of the government. It's the head of the magical government. So, and so yeah, and so Harry, when we get, like, again, if you don't know, if it's your first time through, you don't really know for sure, but you get the sense from the way Fudge is acting that there's an element of danger involving Harry, and that's why he's A, happy to see that he's okay, and B, why he's being like left in Diagon Alley as like sort of a safe place, like stay here, but also don't stay out after dark. So, although that's kind of funny too, because it's like the only way to get in and out of Diagon Alley is through the Leaky Cauldron, which is where he's staying anyway. So it doesn't really matter if it's dark, does it? I don't know. Because that's another like little weird like technicality thing that nobody really thinks about, and I can't even say that I've thought about it until just now, but like obviously when you're walking in Diagon Alley, there's a sky above you, right? Like once you've exited the Leaky Cauldron. So could somebody swoop down into it from above if they're a wizard? Can they see it? Or do you have to come through the Leaky Cauldron to get into it? My guess is probably that you could still see it if you knew where to look. Anyway, whatever. Let's go back to the old YouTube and see if there's any comments that I want to reply to. Okay, so have we dealt with this? Well, this was on the last video, so we'll look at it. We got a little mixed up because somebody, maybe it was Judy, somebody was quoting the years of when, and I don't know if it was somebody, quoted the years of when Hagrid and Voldemort were born, and I had, because of that information, I had them at like 5 years apart, which was wrong. They're like they're 2 years apart in age. So when Hagrid was expelled, Voldemort, or Tom Riddle, was in his 5th year, and Hagrid was in his 3rd. So there's that. Also, it's worth noting that per the 19 years later chapter, if you do the math, that also means that Hagrid was alive in 2017, which could speak to the fact that he ages differently, or it could speak to the fact that he's just got, a relatively long life. Because, I mean, it still puts him, like, I think we decided, I was talking to Advi about this earlier today, I think in his 90s or something. So it's not, like, unheard of, because Dumbledore lives to be 115. Anyway, but everybody was saying that they felt like Hagrid was younger than he was, but he's just not, and I think that it has to do with his giant blood, because he's never described as having gray hair or anything like that. I'm sure by the time young Albus Potter goes to see him in 2017 for tea on his first day of school, that Hagrid probably is gray-haired by then, but we don't, get to see that. So, also in regards to Harry's fortune, it was Judy here who mentions that Harry's like great-great or great-great-great or whatever grandfather invented the Sleek Easy hair potion, which is what Hermione uses in Goblet of Fire to make her hair straight and different, and then sold off either the company or the patent or whatever for a lot of money. So that's why there's sort of like a big ass nest egg in the vault in Gringotts. And I think that's really it as far as the comments go. Let me double check here. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I think that's everything for this chapter and this episode. So we will see you next time, where let's see, can we preview? We'll preview. Chapter 4 is the Leaky Cauldron, which we're not going to talk about what's in the chapter. That's what the next episode's for, right? Yes, it is. Okay. Very good. Thank you, as always, for listening. Hit the old likey button if you want. Leave me some comments or some questions or some things to talk about at the end of next episode. And we will see you then. Peace.